In fact, the book of the Apocalypse starts by saying, revelation of Jesus Christ. That means not only that it is done by him, but that the revelation is Jesus Christ himself. It is in Patmos that St. John writes, because in those days of mourning, somebody from on high, an angel or in the same spirit, made him have a vision of light, of victory. A vision that is not just for him, but for the whole church. That church that he sees in the form of 7 churches are historically the churches he knows, like Ephesus, Smyrna, Philadelphia, Pergamo, etc. But those 7 churches, being 7, is a very important number in the Apocalypse, as it represents all church, made of the true apprenticeship of Christ, but also made of deviations from this ideal. In order to become a source of hope, the Apocalypse is a book that has to be listened to in a context of faith. It is better not to stop at a single page of this book, but according to what the same author appears to suggest. This book should be proclaimed for an entire night inside a church, so that who is listening would not stop to the single images, but would let himself be carried. He would be carried into this vision of things, not to those apparently afraid, but rather to those that encourage him, like the one at chapter 12, or the other one in chapter 21 of the Apocalypse. The Grotto of the Visions is preserved. It is the grotto where St. John would have seen the magnificent battle between good and evil. It would be useful to start reading the Apocalypse, focusing on how the book ends. It does not mean starting at the end, but because the book ends practically calling on the church to come together and to listen, so the church understands that Christ is the victor and invokes him. The church is called in the text the bride, because it is the celestial Jerusalem that comes down as a bride, going towards the Lord, her spouse, together with the Spirit. The church, being sustained by the Spirit, turns to the Lord and says, "Come, Lord Jesus." We know from the second letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians that the invocation, "Come, Lord Jesus," was typical of the churches. The Lord has come, but he wants to be invoked so to come. Of course, not in history, where he is already incarnated, but in the heart of the church, and in the heart of every faithful. The monastery of St. John the Apostle, the theologian, was built by Christodoulos, a monk who came from Asia, from Mount Athos. In the year 1088, Christodoulos presented himself at the court of Emperor Alexios I Komnenos in Byzantium. The emperor accepted his request. The monastery of St. John the Theologian was built over the ruins of the original 4th century Basilica of St. John. St. John and his disciple Procurus were exiled to Patmos and tied up with a chain on the boat with the Roman soldiers. But the Roman soldiers fell in the sea during a storm. They implored John to pray to save them. When the Apostle John prayed, a very big wave came and took them all safe to port. When St. John was in Patmos, baptized the Roman soldiers, and he started baptizing and preaching to people. St. John was also the disciple that lived longer than all the others. He was probably the youngest among them, and he lived about 100 years. But also for this reason, he was greatly venerated in the primitive community. St. Paul was a searcher of the truth, and he let the truth win when he encountered it. Tarsus is a city that gave great possibilities to Paul, and not only to Paul, but to all of Christianity. Because he was born there, and probably because his father had Roman citizenship, Paul had the privilege of also having Roman citizenship. So at the moment he was condemned at Caesarea, instead of being condemned as any Jewish person, he had the faculty to appeal to Caesar. So the representative in Caesarea could do nothing else but to send him to Rome. In Rome he would undergo martyrdom, but before that he would be able to talk to a Christian community already existing in Rome. To speak about the Apostle St. Paul is never ending because of his role in building the church. His role is as important as the role of St. Peter. He and St. Peter became the two apostles that remind us of the representatives of all the other apostles.